Welcome to another episode of Courageous Me. And I don't know if you have listened to one of the previous episodes where I had the founder of Born to Boogie on board. Well, she is also responsible for introducing me to this amazing guest I've got today. This is Ruth Fae. She is an intuitive writing coach and editor, and I'm going to have to get you to explain what that means, Ruth. And Ruth and I used to dance together in Born to Boogie. I think we did 5 or 6 seasons together. So we got to face that whole fear of dancing and performing on stage together. So we bonded really quickly and we became friends off the back of that. We both have had a break from dancing over the last I reckon it's about 18 months, 2 years. And we're rekindling, and I believe there's been a lot change in your life. But Ruth, before we get into it, what excites you about having a conversation about courage?
Well, thank you for inviting me onto your podcast, Kim. It's beautiful to be here and to catch up with you after the last couple of years. Um, I was having a think about this and what courage means to me. And the thing that I find interesting about courage is that it's not, for me, it's not that whole feel the fear and do it anyway. Like there's a level of that, but that sort of has a level of pushing and forcing through difficulty. And for me, it's more about making conscious choices. And sometimes those choices can be scary. Um, Sometimes they can be difficult and they can be hard, and you can hurt other people in the choices that you make, but they need to be made for yourself or whatever. Um, so for me, courage is I've learned over the last few years that courage is listening to your body wisdom. It's listening to your intuition. It's assessing things like whatever's happening in your life, assessing them, looking at the pros and cons, looking at how things are affecting you, how that they do affect the other people in your life, and making the decisions that are for your highest good with compassion and grace and mercy and all of those things caught up into it. So I think that's why it's exciting for me because I have been listening to your podcast, um, catching up with you vicariously through talking to other people. But it's everyone has a different definition or a different reason or a different whatever that courage means to them. And it's been really interesting for me to actually sit with that for the last couple of weeks and go, well, what does it mean to me? Oh yeah, what that person says, that's interesting. And when that person says that's interesting, but what do I believe it to be?
And that's the beautiful thing that I found too, is that courage turns up really differently in different people's lives. It
Mm,
looks really different and it actually changes over time
yeah.
depending on what's going on in your world. And one thing, there's some questions I'll ask someone and about something they've done, and they won't think that that's really courageous. Yet to someone else, that would have to be something they would have to dig really deep down into the depths of their soul to actually find those answers.
Yeah.
I'm gathering, therefore, that if courage really is quite intuitive in listening to your own conscious body and what's going on inside you, I'm gathering you're on that journey and that is part of what's going on. Please, please talk to me about that. Where did that get started? Because when we were dancing, we would dance and laugh and giggle and we would talk about, what costumes are we going to wear and how are we going to get on that stage and not forget all our moves. Obviously, something has shifted in you. I can feel it energetically. I'd love you to share what that means, given especially that courage sounds like it's very, very close to your heart.
It is, and I've been on I'm going to say it's a spiritual journey because it has been very spiritual. I've always been quite a spiritually aware person, but never really known how to fit it into my life. And I've explored, and my grandmother on my mum's side was a spiritual medium, so this is something that has been part of my upbringing and my life and my awareness anyway. But when you're in your 20s doing your things, and then in your 30s having kids, and then in your 40s with your life crises and all of those sorts of things, um, that was something that kind of sat to the side for me. It was there, but I very much lost touch with my intuition, and following that internal wisdom that little thing that comes up and goes, no, do you really want to do this? I'm not so sure. Might be dangerous to walk down that dark alleyway, or yes, do it. This is great. Like full body. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I lost touch and lost trust in that in myself. So over the last 3 years, it's so funny that it's sort of defined by COVID, but and in some ways, all the lockdowns that we experienced in Melbourne did play a huge part in that. But my marriage ended at the start of 2020, and that really kicked off this journey of figuring out who I am, who I want to be. It's taken this year, my word has been courage. Last year, my word was strength to get me through the year because I needed strength to keep going at times. It was a difficult year. I don't think I had a word the year before because I thought that was a stupid practice, but now I really like it. And I've got courage written up on a post-it note in my office.
Why did
Um,
you think that was stupid? And now
um,
you're embracing it.
I didn't. It's so silly because I'm a writer. So words to me are magical. You cast spells with words, you create worlds with words, create connection with words. Like, I love words, but in my own life, I didn't see that having a word that was just this focal point of how to be and to get through times that are tough. Um, I didn't really see that that had any validity. And I'd hear people go, at the start of the year, all those New Year's posts of my word for the year is this and that, the next thing. And I was like, yeah, whatever. But then when my business has changed a lot in the last 3 years as well and evolved dramatically. And when I did my values, I did them a couple of years ago with a dear friend who was a business mentor at the time as well. And that was really difficult because I was like, oh, okay, what are they? And came up with five. And then I redid them after another year and came up with another five. And that was when I started to see that having that focus of those 5 words were my touch points in my business, but they were also my touch points in my life because my business and my life, it's just me. So they're one and the same. Um, so those values are my values. And then, yeah, it was last year when I was like, okay, so what's my word for this year going to be? Because that little post-it note in my life is really relevant and important. And it does, if I'm making a decision, it's coming back to that. If I'm feeling fear, it's coming back to that. How do I need to give myself the strength to get through this? And now it's being courageous. It's taking those steps even though they can be really scary.
Oh, yeah. And can I ask? So you had 5 words that were your values.
Yeah.
And then when you redid them, were the words the same?
There was one that changed. Put them written up there. I can't think
Are
what
you
it
comfortable to
was.
share them?
Yes, they changed order. And there was one that changed, but I can't now remember what it was. I have what it changed to.
Oh,
And
what?
that was interesting because that one, so my first value, my ultimate guiding goal for my life and my business is connection. Um, because I believe as people, the connections that we have are so valuable and so important. And in my work, helping people to write and tell their stories, that is about connecting with other people, about, your message or your words resonating so people don't feel alone, so they can get inspiration. There's a lot. But so that's definitely the thing. Um, and then integrity is my next one. I haven't always done that well in business. I probably haven't always done that well in life. Like, I've made mistakes and I have let clients down and I have let people down. Um, but for me, that's coming back to that is, I am going to make mistakes, but it's owning those mistakes and it's making reparation for those mistakes. So that's where that integrity comes in.
You're
And then
kind
the last,
of, you're
pardon?
human. You're really human.
Yeah, yes, aren't we all?
Yeah.
Um, and then joy, hope, and freedom are the other three. And a lot of that has come through the work that I do because the people that I work with. But joy is an interesting one because I've had a lot of people say to me, "Oh, you're so joyous to talk to. Oh, you're so funny," and things like that. And I never saw myself like that. Like, I kind of thought I was a bit corny and a bit probably stupid, like in that putting yourself down kind of thing. And I'd say things and then go, "Oh, why did I say that? Like, that sounded so dumb." It's a lot of self-criticism. And then I started asking people and saying, am I really? Like, why do you think I'm funny? Why do you think I'm joyous? And having it reflected back to me, I was then able to go, well, actually, yeah, I do embrace joy. I like people to be happy. I like to have a giggle and a laugh with my family, with my friends, with random strangers at the supermarket. Like, so yes, I'm going to embody that more and I'm going to bring that into my life and into my business more. We don't have to be serious all the time.
And isn't that interesting though that it took, even though that was a word that was quite dear to you, it took you asking others to validate that, yeah, I am
Yeah.
that, and yeah, I can embrace that. I reckon about 20 or 30 years ago, I was a trainer at the time, and my boss said to me, one tip I'll give you, Kim, is always just be aware of how others perceive you. Obviously, understand who you are and how you perceive yourself, but also be aware of how others perceive you. And if you don't know, ask. And I found so exactly what you've just
Mm,
done. And, people aren't going to tell you horrible things. Typically, they might do it online or, you've got a whole troll culture. But, people that really care about you will give you input where you can then embrace it.
mm,
So thank you for sharing your value. I'm massive, massive believer in understanding and not just having the word, but understanding what that word embodies, how that plays out in your life, how it helps you make
mm,
decisions, whether it fulfills you or it doesn't. Massive fan. So I love that your journey has been to revisit what your values are, albeit one of them changing order, and that you are part of it and that you do have a word for the year. So, on that note, you've split with your husband, wondering who you are. What kind of, because I know there's been a lot of change, because when we were dancing together, you were a copywriter, and I know because you used to do a fair bit of work for me. And I believe all of that changed. What kicked off some of this change?
mm. So many things. One of them, I guess, was a full identity change. Like I went from being, wife, mum of four, the volunteer person at all the clubs and all that sort of stuff, who, had this business that I was trying to get off the ground as a copywriter. Um, all the things that you define yourself by, and then all of a sudden that disappeared because I, had been married for 20 years and my ex-husband and I had been together for, well, we'd known each other for 30 years. So this person who was a huge part of my life wasn't there anymore. Um, I was having to create a home for myself and my children, and that was when all the lockdowns kind of kicked in around that time as well. So that was it was a challenge in many ways, but it was also, I'm actually incredibly grateful because what it meant was that as a family we were able to navigate this really difficult situation, and I got to spend time with my kids like they're teenagers. If that had been normal times, they would have been out doing teenagery things. Um, but for those 2 years, I spent so much time with especially my older three who were in their teens, and I'm so grateful for that because what teenagers want to really hang out with their mum. But we did, and we played music, and we played games, and we did stupid things, and we talked about what was going on in our world. So that was kind of beautiful. And we were able to heal a lot together before stepping out into public, and then people saying, "Oh my God, you guys split up." Well, yeah, yeah, we did, but it's okay now. Like it was really painful, and it still makes me cry and makes me sad at times, but that healing had already started, which was kind of beautiful.
Mm.
Um, but one of the biggest things was that um, my ex-husband asked me to give his name back, his surname back, which was fine. But what that did for me was threw me into this massive identity crisis for probably a month, maybe longer, because I don't even have a middle name. So I couldn't just go to calling myself Ruth whatever because my parents didn't give me a middle name. So, and I didn't want to go back to my maiden name. So I was really stuck in this, well, who am I? And it went deep, like, oh my God, I don't know what to call myself. I don't know who I am. What does this mean? Do I even like myself? Like, it was this, then who do I want to be? Am I reinventing myself, or am I getting in touch with who I've always been but lost touch with? So much came into it. Um, and at the same time, my business was changing because, like you said, I was working as a copywriter. And I still was, but that changed because a lot of it was online, and I was recognizing that working traditionally as a copywriter and how I'd been trained wasn't working for me because I felt this inherent disconnect between client and service provider, I guess, where, I interview you and then I go and write your copy and then I bring it back, and then there's backwards and forwards, but it was detached. So I was developing this program of working co-creation is what I called it. It was co-creative copywriting. I think I could come up with a better name as a copywriter, but um, where I was sitting on Zoom with clients and writing their web copy with them and writing their blogs with them. So giving them that support and learning, and I could teach them how to do it and how to put headings in and what's important and all the tips and tricks that I'd learned, so that they could then, if they were doing a blog post, they could do that themselves, and I would still be there to be able to edit or review or proofread or give ideas, but it was a co-creative space. And at that time was when I was invited to edit two people's books, so that sort of came into play as well, and then that's what I fell in love with. So that's sort of how my business changed. But I needed to find a new business name, and I've always had a connection with fairy tales, and like I love stories. So um, fairy tales and the Fae, and didn't really understand it, but I had been given a diary by a dear friend that was with fairies. It was beautiful. I can't even remember what it was called now, but it was a like for journaling. And so I was talking to my now partner, and we were throwing around names for the business, and came up with Fae Blood Publications, and that was it. And I went, oh my goodness, that's I'm going to call myself Ruth Fae, and my business is Fae Blood Publications, and it's that spiritual connection with other and mystery and fantasy and all of that, which is all I found it fascinating. Um, and that became my name, and I'm now currently changing it officially. I'm in the process of that at the moment. So
So Faye's literally made up. Like it's
yeah.
not a family connection or a past. Oh, that is just absolutely golden. I love it. Where's the blood come from?
I've been asked that before.
Hmm.
I worked with a dear friend who's a graphic designer, and we were talking about that because it was actually my partner who came up with the name, and I was like, yeah, that sounds cool. And she said that she's like, why blood? And I was like, oh, I don't know. Um, but what it is, what I worked out is it's about life force. Again, it's a slightly spiritual thing, but it's about our blood is our life force. It's it's that flow of energy through our body. It's we talk a lot about bleeding. Like when we're hurt, we bleed. It's real, it's raw, but it's also this incredibly giving energy. And I had an oracle reading um, at the start of sort of 3 years ago um, with this oracle reader and healer who I know through the basketball club that we used to be part of. And um, she connects with the Fae as well. And one of the things she said to me is, "You have Fae blood in you." And my ancestry is Celtic. I come from a Scottish background. As I said, I have a grandmother who's an oracle reader, and that just I don't necessarily understand it, but it made sense somewhere deep in my soul. So
Oh, how
that's kind of where
beautiful.
that came from too.
I look at the word blood in completely different perspective and different light now. That is glorious. So talk to me then. You made a comment earlier that when you had to give back your surname because the marriage was ending, you didn't want to take back your maiden name. Why not?
Okay, so this is where the courage comes into this part of the conversation. Um, my my father's side of the family is some of my father's side of the family are beautiful people. There are other people in my father's side of the family who are not so beautiful. And there's a history of abuse in that side of the family. And unfortunately, as a child, I experienced abuse within my family. So that's why, like, it's something that I've known and dealt with for a long time. Um, and struggled with at times as well. But that's why I didn't want to go back to my family name. It just felt wrong. And around that time that I was going through this identity crisis as well, I was made aware of another situation within the family too that just added to the stuff I was already aware of. So um, that's not to say everyone, obviously, in that side of the family, there are some beautiful people there, but it's just a name I didn't want to continue. I didn't want to go back to. I didn't want to be defined by that name, especially as that person was a kid who struggled, was a kid who was sad, scared, and more than anything was silenced. Um, this this and an event which I will go into in a second that happened at the start of this month, well, start of July actually, um, were the first times that I've publicly spoken about what I experienced as a child. Who knows where this conversation will go, but it is I'm struggling to even say the words now, and I've chosen to talk about this, but it is difficult to find the words, and I'm having to be brave right now. Um,
Oh,
so
Ruth.
yeah, but I'll just jump a little bit because it will, I think, help your listeners. In At the start of July, I wrote a chapter in a multi-author book that was called Betrayed, and it was exploring the sister wound, which is the ways that females can wound each other due to the systems that are in place in our society and culture and all the rest of it. And I had decided what I was going to write about. And I'm not normally a planner in my writing, but I had planned this entire chapter and it was all cool and I was going ahead. And then I sat down in a writing circle via Zoom with some of the other authors one Saturday morning. And the story that came out was not the story that I had planned at all. It was the story about, I didn't go into details, but it was the story about being abused as a child. It was the story about when I was raped as a 16-year-old. It explored those concepts of child abuse, child sexual abuse, rape within society, how we handle that as people, as women, and obviously, this was back in the 80s, so things were different then, with awareness and all the rest of it. But right, the words just flowed. That obviously was a story that needed to be told, and I loved it. It came really easily. I enjoyed writing it. It was challenging at times, and I did cry, and I'd stomp around the house and make a cup of tea, and then come back to my desk. But really, it flowed quite easily. But then when it went the night before it was going to be launched and published, which was a Monday, um, I had to chat to my sister because obviously she needed to read the chapter. So we've been on the phone having a talk about things. And I went to bed and I woke up at midnight and I vomited straight for 12 hours. And initially I was like, what have I eaten? What have I drunk? Like, what's going on? And then my partner was like, this is anxiety. And I was like, crap, I think it might be. And the word, speaking of words, the word that was in my head was purging. And I feel that I was so terrified of putting this out into the world and speaking, like finally speaking my truth, um, that I was having this incredible physical response to it. And it was vomit. And it was releasing tension. It was releasing all of the things I couldn't say. It was releasing hurt, pain, anger, frustration, sadness, care for little me, like all of this stuff just purged. No other word. Um, And I was terrified. I was terrified for this book to hit the shelves. And at one point, I was like, I'm ringing the publishers, I'm pulling my chapter, I can't do it. Um, but that would have been such a disservice to myself and to the people who can potentially be helped by what I've written about. And I have already had people contact me saying that they've had similar experiences or it helped them to hear what I had to say or that they gained some understanding from it. I've had to have conversations with my children that I didn't expect to have because what if they read it? What if their friends' mums read it? Like it was so big. But then I spoke to my therapist on the Thursday, I think it was. My psychologist, a beautiful lady who's been with me throughout sort of the whole divorce period for the last 3 years. And she explained the physiological part of it to do with um, when you experience great anxiety and release. I don't know, I can't remember the details, but it's to do with where the vagus nerve runs through your stomach, so it can be irritated, and then and that can, but the vomiting actually helps to settle down the pain centers in your brain, and there's this huge like physiological response that we don't know about. And she was like, "This is great. This means your body is working properly. It means that your mind and your body are connected and working in conjunction with each other to help you through this difficult time." So even the scientific, physical aspect of it, and then there's the mental aspect, and then there's the spiritual aspect, they all kind of came together. And while it was absolutely freaking terrifying and horrible and exhausting, um, it was it was amazing. And I'm so pleased that I was actually able to go through that. Now I don't even remember what your question was in the first place, but that's your
That's
answer.
exactly right. And to be honest, like my whole body, I mean, I haven't vomited, but my whole body just reacted when you were sharing that. And, the first thought coming through my head was, if it's making you this uncomfortable, why are you doing it? Because you could have rung the publisher.
I could
very
have.
easily. Why didn't you?
Um, I didn't because in my work now, so I work as an intuitive writing coach and editor, and in my work, I help people tell their stories. There's a lot to it, but part of that is helping people tell their stories confidently, and it can be really scary. And the people who are referred to me or come into my world, however they come into my world, because often it's in the strangest of ways, um, all of them have stories to tell that are harrowing in some way. I've recently just worked with an author whose son died unexpectedly 10 years ago, and she wanted to tell his story as a legacy to him and what he brought to the world. He was only 23, and that made me cry because my eldest only 21, so it was so sad. Um, but also what she has been through in that time. And we worked together for about 6 to 8 weeks, once a week. We had an hour and a half session together. She'd already written her book. She employed me as her editor. But in that journey of working together, yes, we dotted I's and crossed T's and argued over where commas should be and all the rest of it. But what really happened was I helped her work through her fears of launching her book into the world and making sure that it was as it needed to be to convey the message that she wanted to convey in a way that was safe for her because she was scared too. Um, I have worked with people who have stories about child abuse. I'm working with a lady at the moment. Um, that's her story as well. Even clients who are not writing about it, chances are, even in our first meeting, they'll say, "Oh, I was abused as a child." And I'm like, "Oh my God, me too." And then we can have a conversation about it. It is so common, Kim, and it blows my mind that just within my little business and the people that I'm talking to, this is coming up again and again and again. And I realized, even when it got scary, that I know I help people in that way. That's it's not just about editing and grammar. I know I can help them energetically. I can guide and coach them and mentor them or work with them through this through their journey of writing and then launching their book into the world. Because once it's out there, it's out there. You've got no control. Um, but I wasn't doing that myself. And that was the driving force. It was very much a put your money where your mouth is woman. Um, Experience it. And in doing that, and then the raw experience that I had, I now feel was humbled by it because I'm like, I've been helping people, but not necessarily knowing how they felt. Whereas now, having gone through that, I feel I can say to people, hey, I can guide you through this because I get it. Like, I get it. There was 12 hours worth of vomiting involved. I get how terrifying this can be.
And how many years of holding it in? How many
Yeah.
years of not really letting out something that was so big, the weight emotionally of what you've been carrying around? I can't even imagine.
Mm.
I seriously can't. And how do you feel now? Now that, okay, it is published. How long ago was it published?
It was the start of July, the 3rd of July.
Oh, right. So we're recent.
Very
We're
recent.
now 10th of August. So very, very
Yeah.
recent. How are you feeling right now about it, knowing that it's out there, knowing that there are people in your world who won't even, I didn't know this, that are learning about you and a really like a side of you that is not, I went to the farm last week. Talk
Yeah.
to me about how that's playing out in your life.
Um, it is a little confronting. I do worry that my mum's going to read it. Well, she
Probably.
knows, obviously, but it does terrify me that she's going to read it because she is silenced too. Like she's lived this as well. So I do get scared. And then sometimes I feel guilty because I have had a few people who I know but not well who have read it and contacted me and said all beautiful things, but they've said I cried. And then I go into this, oh my God, I didn't mean to make you cry. Like I didn't want you to cry. It's actually a really positive story. This doesn't define me. Like, yes, this is part of my history. It's part of who I am. It has shaped me. It has made things difficult at times, but I'm actually learning to be quite okay and comfortable with who I am. Sometimes it's difficult, but it's okay. Like I'm not a puddle on the floor. I'm just me. And we've all got shit in our past. We've all got things that have affected us in some way. And I think that's the thing was it seemed like such a big deal to actually say these words out loud. But in reality, it doesn't change who I am. It's not that big a deal. And if by talking about it, I can give someone else comfort or help them feel less alone or let them know that there are other options. And it is, like we said at the beginning, it is about making choices. I had one now ex-friend who often said to me, oh, she knew, and she was like, "Oh, I can't understand why you're not a drug addict. I can't understand why you're not an alcoholic." And I was like, well, it's just not an option for me. Like, no, that's, I guess there's times I could have used those things to deal with pain, especially in my younger years. And there's probably times like, as a teenager where I was a binge drinker and doing stupid things.
You're a
Um,
teenager, right?
yeah, into my 20s probably, but ultimately we all do that anyway. Like, well, not so much nowadays, but certainly we did. So yeah, it's part of who I am, but it's all being releasing it has been helpful because it's not keeping it in there. And yes, people might talk about it now, but the next bit of whatever interesting news will come along. Um, and the other part of it is that I've known, so I repressed the memories. They didn't come back to me till I was 23. And I knew at 23 when I was getting psychological help and went through the Centre Against Sexual Assault in Melbourne and had some amazing guidance through that experience. And I knew then I wanted to write about it, but I've never known how and I've never been brave enough. And then this opportunity came up and I went, I'm going to take it. I'm going to join these people. And every author in that book has written a story that is painful. It's painful, but they have come through it. They've grown, they've learned, they've made choices that are the best for them and for their families to not let that pain define them. And that's really important for people in pain to know. We always, even when it feels like we don't, we have a choice. Even if it's a tiny choice, there's a choice.
And I love where you're coming from that, yes, there has been all this pain and if you've realized and the memories were coming back on that at
Mm.
23. And how old are you now?
50.
50.
Woohoo!
That's a fair amount of time to be fully aware of what happened and to
Mm.
keep it in. But I guess that in sharing it, it's not about, hey, look at me and what happened and feel sorry for me. It's
Mm-hmm.
how can sharing my story help someone else maybe but detach from an event that has haunted them or defined them or what have you, so that they can move forward. And I can feel that this is not an easy conversation, but you're still having it. You didn't have to have it. I didn't know about this.
No.
This conversation could have taken any direction, but you've gone here. And I mean, that in it, so this is courage at another level, Ruth. Like, seriously, this is unbelievable. So, how now, knowing that this is out, it's still reasonably raw and fresh, and obviously you haven't had the conversation with your mum yet, is that correct?
Um, oh, I haven't told her I wrote the book. I don't think she'll see it.
Oh, really?
Um,
It's only in public. This is a public podcast.
I know. That's a really difficult one. Telling my kids was my first priority,
And
because
you've
they
done
didn't.
that.
Yes, I did that before the book was launched. I was terrified again. That was a vomit-worthy moment. Um, However, talking to them was amazing. I spoke to two of them together. There's four of them, so it's always a juggle to get them all together. But and my daughter was my eldest daughter was she just cuddled me. She just came over and she said, "I don't have any words, Mum." And I was like, "That's okay. I can feel what you're saying," and it's making me teary. But she just cuddled. And I said, "You guys have any questions?" Because my fear was that they would look at me differently, or they'd think I was not their mum, like something. I don't know. I was just so scared they would see me differently or as weak, or all my own shame and self-judgment and guilt that built up over those years was all just like, woohoo, here I am again. Take that. Um, but she didn't, like none of them did, but she was beautiful in that it was just a cuddle and I love you, mum. And my eldest son was like, I'm so proud of you for doing this. Like, if you feel it's important to do this, mum, I'm so proud of you. And then he was like, it doesn't change anything. You're just my mum, which was the words that I exactly needed to hear at that moment.
Golden. You're just my mum.
Yeah, yeah. But it didn't change anything. I've said to them if they want to read it, they can, but I would like them to tell me. They haven't, they've chosen not to. And then one of my other children, my other son, when I told him, we were having a car chat. Those chats you have with your boys in the car where you're just driving,
Golden.
and yeah, it's kind
I
of
can't go
harmless.
anywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
The
Um,
captivated audience, yeah.
yeah, and we don't do that often because he drives himself now, but we did. I'd asked him to come with me for a drive so we could have a chat, and he then told me a story that I can't go into because it's his story, but he told me about an event that happened to him that was really challenging for him that he wouldn't have told me about if I hadn't shared my story with him. And that was my, not that I needed validation, but that was my validation because it brought us closer. It gave him a voice, something he'd sat on for a couple of years. He was then able to talk to me about and has said, he knows that I would like to do some work in this area. I'm not entirely sure where. I read Grace Tame's story recently, The Ninth Life of a Diamond Miner, I think it's called, where she shares her story about abuse she suffered from a teacher at school, and she's very, very active in creating change within Australia, within the justice system, effectively. So I've been doing quite a lot of research into her work and trying to figure out how I can make a difference too. And part of that is speaking and being public about it. Um, Not only the abuse I suffered as a kid, but also so many kids are raped. I was watching, there's an SBS documentary called, I can't remember what it's called now. Something to do with, oh, I can't remember. I'll find and let you know. But I mention it in my chapter anyway in the book. It's the name's just escaped, but that was talking about how the incidence of rape and assault, sexual assault in high school age kids is on the increase in Australia, even though consent is talked about, even though the things that we didn't talk about when we were 16 are now so much more. There's so much more awareness about that. But even so, maybe it's because it's been reported more, which is not a bad thing, but it's still happening. So there needs to be more conversations. There needs to be, this stuff happens because people are silenced. Um, the more we talk about it, the more we step into the space of going, well, actually, this happened to me and it was shit. Um, but when Me Too came out, everyone I knew had a story somewhere in the spectrum, if there is such a thing. Everyone did. So the more we can talk about it, the more that we can bring this stuff into awareness and challenge a society that keeps it quiet, that's the only way we can make change. And that's what I want to be doing. And I can't do that if I don't share my own story.
Oh, absolutely. And do you think there's any coincidence then that even though you weren't ready to speak it out aloud, you're a copywriter? Like you for so long, not now,
Yeah.
you're all these other things now. But it's interesting, it's almost like you're a copywriter, which means you're telling other people's stories.
Yep.
And maybe that, there's no, I love the reflection when you look back and go, oh my goodness, you know, because you weren't ready yet to have your own voice. You weren't
Yep.
ready to share something that was so personal. It's almost like it's been, leading up to doing that. So visibility, you mentioned
Yep.
visibility, that by now having, the chance to get this out and out into the open that can benefit so many people, it's scary to then become, visible. And I remember years and years and years ago, and I was doing a promo video for my business at the time, and I rang you and said, hey, Ruth, I need to get someone along to go through, the fear of being in front of video and what holds them back. And I rang you, and your very timid voice said, yeah, sure, I'll do that, Kim. And I was only looking at that video the other day, and one of the comments you make, and I said, how are you feeling about being in front of the camera? And you said, I'm so terrified. That's why I'm a writer,
Hmm.
because I avoid having to be in front of the camera. I avoid having to be visible. I'm doing it all behind the scenes. Now that this is all out, how's that changing? What are some of the things you're doing to increase that visibility?
Well, one of the things that I realized is that when I started, so since October last year, I've been involved in writing in 5 multi-author books. Um, that have been in five very, very different areas of my life, which was not intentional. I just went with what felt good and it kind of just happened that way. And I did pick up exactly that, that my journey through um, writing for a teenage girls magazine as a freelance writer when my kids were little, to then working as a copywriter after my youngest started school. It was all about helping other people tell their stories because I was avoiding like hell telling my own. So you picked that up very well. Um, but part of writing a book, whether it's with other people or by yourself, is that you have to market it. You have to talk about it. You have to do interviews about it. You have to do Facebook posts and Instagram posts and talk to the world. And famous people who write books, maybe they're already famous, so it's a bit easier. I don't know. But if they're writing memoirs, it's probably not that easy. I remember reading Slash's memoir, and I can imagine it probably wasn't very easy for him to talk about some of the stuff that he did when he was younger, even if he was this public figure. So, um, yeah, I have struggled, and in all honesty, with the launch of Betrayed, I dropped off all social media for 2 weeks. I did some obligatory posts, and I felt terrible. I felt like I was letting the publishers down and the other authors down, and I edited that book too, so it was very close to my heart. But I just couldn't, like the fear just was there. But there are two more books in that series, and I'm writing in both of them, so I'll make up for it in those ones. Um, but so what I have done is I did a course called Visibility on Purpose, which was run by a lady that I'd written a book with. She was one of the lead publishers in that book. She's industry based in the indie publishing world, so we'd got to know each other quite well. And she
Who
was
is it,
running.
can I ask?
Her name is Bridget Cisco, I think is how you say her
Okay.
surname.
Just
Yeah.
to give her credit for, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So her course is Visibility on Purpose, and it's 8 weeks, and it talks to you about brand positioning statement and really delving into who you are and what your story is and creating a pitch that you can then send out to podcasts or media in whatever way feels right for you. And it is about sharing your story and talking about things. And um, so I have started. I found that talking on podcasts is a good step for me. The thought of public speaking still scares me, but podcasts are a really good way to go. I like I have done some presenting recently within my work as well, like to authors, and um, filmed a couple of courses and things like that for my business. And I work much better if there's someone on the other end of the camera. So that I like the to and fro conversation. Um, so that works really well. But I am, it's, again, a very synchronistic meeting. I've met a lady who runs a program called Women Speak, and I'm working as her editor, and she is I've decided to jump in and do the program, so I'm learning how to do public speaking as well, but it's in a fairly contained, safe space where you're practicing and getting feedback and that kind of stuff, which is what I need. Like, there's no way I'm jumping on a TEDx talk right yet.
Yeah, just wait.
Yeah.
We'll be having that conversation and you'll be taking them about to get on the stage. Is that Casey Baker?
It's her course, yes, but the lady who's running it is called Karen Garfton. She lives relatively
She's
close
the
to me.
Australian rep. I'm
Yeah.
obsessed with Casey Baker and her.
Really?
Oh gosh, obsessed with her. Totally, madly, deeply. I follow her. I've read her ebooks. Oh
Wow.
yeah, I love her, and I love her story about how she got into speaking. And I think with all of this too, Ruth, is that when there's something deeper inside you, you've got a purpose that's more than just getting on a stage and being brave in front of an audience. You've got a purpose you want to share. So getting past
Mm.
these fears of being visible or being public, now there's a reason that is bigger than you for you being able to do this. So
Yeah.
I think
And
that definitely plays in, doesn't it?
I think a lot of it as well is a lot of the healing work I've done over the last 3 years has been looking at those narratives that we tell ourselves. And I'm a storyteller. I work with storytellers. People always, I've said this to you, but like years ago, people always say I can't write. Um, and yeah, everyone says that, right? But we can tell stories. We can. You tell beautiful stories in your business. You always have. You've encouraged people in financial services to tell their stories and to be seen as people, not just a financial advisor or an accountant. We all have stories to tell, whether it's within our business or personally or to create change in our world, like whatever it is that we do. And I realized that one of my narratives was, I can't go on video. I can't do public speaking. And now I'm like, why not? Who said that? Who made that up? Was that 4-year-old me? Was that 16-year-old me? Was it 22-year-old me? I don't know who made that up. So that person, love you. Thank you for protecting me. It was great that you did that, but step aside because I'm going to challenge that narrative that you've created. And it's not easy. And even then, I stumbled on my words and I'm like, oh my God, in my head. But it doesn't matter. I wave my arms around. Also doesn't really matter. Um, and I just want to touch on that we met through Born to Boogie, and I love Tennille and what she stands for, and I did listen to the podcast that you recorded with her, and learning more about her story. Wow, like I've known Tennille for years. I knew her as she was starting this program, even though I wasn't doing it then. So just hearing her story was amazing, but I have realized that doing Born to Boogie was the start of a change in my life because that was absolutely me on stage. You know me, 2 left feet, like never going to happen. I always used to say these things about myself. Not only did I meet amazing people and do something that was way out of my comfort zone, um, and have some beautiful, like insane experiences while doing that and learning a lot about myself. I justified doing that because I wrote a blog. I don't know if you remember it, but I did a weekly blog that I posted as part of, because I believed so much in with what Tennille was doing, that I offered to write a blog about my experience as this, 40 whatever, 42-year-old woman with 4 kids and 2 left feet who with very little self-confidence, how I perceived it, um, going through this 13-week program. So I did a weekly blog about it, but that was the only way I could justify doing that because it was for her. She didn't ask me to do it. She was happy for me to do it. And it meant that people could actually maybe want to do it because they could read the blog and see that, yes, it's scary, but you're fully supported and all the rest of it and what an amazing experience it is. But the only reason I could convince myself to do Born to Boogie was because it helped someone else, because I didn't see that I was actually worthy of that help. But looking back on it now, while that was my outward justification, I knew I wanted to challenge myself and I knew I wanted to give it a go and try and do something. My kids all danced and they were encouraging me, and I couldn't keep saying no. Like, what sort of role model am I if I'm like, oh, you do it, you go on stage, you go and perform and get judged, but I'm not doing that. So, yeah, it was doing Born to Boogie was absolutely the start of my journey to where I am now. And there was bumps and hiccups and a windy road along the way, but yeah, it's really interesting to look at it as that progression.
Oh, it does. And you've touched on something really interesting, which so many women, not all, but so many women particularly find or feel guilty about doing things for themselves. That, as you said, I could justify doing it if I thought I was helping someone else out. And, this is, one of the little things that I do a lot of work with this with my clients when they don't feel they can do it for themselves. And it's like, but they would absolutely do anything for anyone. If you had to get on stage because it meant that it was going to help your child in something that they weren't dealing with, you'd do it tomorrow. So why don't we give the same respect and treat ourselves like that? And it's a really hard one to grapple with, but so beautiful that you did do it. And I just did a podcast episode. I've just been away for a girls' adventure weekend where I went away with 9 other women who I only knew one of them, and I only knew her through a work relationship, to do some sort of crazy wild adventure that I didn't know about. The fear in me, even the guilt that I was going away for a weekend, I had to get past all of that. And it was the most wonderful, joyous experience. And part of the reason why she started that group was that as we get older, we almost stop giving ourselves permission to do things for us. Or, oh, I'm older now, I can't do that. Or, her one was when she became a mum, someone said to her, well, you can't go on roller coasters anymore. It's like, what? Why not? Of course I can. So if Boogie started your journey and, Tennille's story and sharing her story, and that what happened when she was 7, that she'd kind of hung on to a schoolyard incident. But doesn't it just knowing that gives you more insight into how beautiful Boogie was, even at a greater level than it was when you didn't know that story. It's just, I think everyone,
Mm,
when you get into the heart, when you get into what's really human about someone, I don't know, just to me, that's where the absolute gold is.
yeah.
And what's next for you then, Ruth? I mean, my normal question is, where have you got to reach in now and find some courage for the next bit? Mind you, you've been reaching in for the last few years at a level I had not expected, and I'm grateful. So, what's next for you then? Where have you got to find more courage to keep moving forward?
It's really funny. I was thinking this when you said something earlier as well. So many people say to me, "Oh, you're so brave,"
Yep.
and I I'm beginning to see it a little bit more now, but I've never seen myself as brave. I've seen myself as a coper. I've seen myself as someone who can organize things and give to the community and and also someone who's flawed and messy and all the rest of it. I'm by far from being perfect, and I'm cool with that. But I genuinely do think that I'm a nice person at heart. I try my best. But I've never really put that. I've never really seen anything as being brave, which is why this whole thing about courage is really interesting, as something to look at more deeply, like you were just saying. And as far as courageous next step, like I mentioned the stepping into public speaking, but the biggest thing that is, I can't actually believe I'm admitting this publicly, but I'm going to put it out there into the universe. I have had a book, I've actually had three books, but there's one book in particular that has been bubbling in me since my 18-year-old was in year eight. So what, he's 12, 13 or whatever at that stage. There was an incident that happened at that time. And I actually do remember talking to you about it years and years ago because I was so distraught for what he went through. And watching, anyway, so I'm writing a book. It's what I'm trying to say to you. And I'm busy helping, again, I'm helping everybody else write their books, everyone else launch their books into the world, everyone else find their voice. And my own book, or books, because there are three, I keep putting them aside and, oh, that can come later. And I'll do that when I've done my client work or when I have fed the kids dinner or when I've had a sleep or whatever. Like it's not something that I have because I'm scared. Ultimately, it's because I'm scared. What if I'm crap at it? What if I'm not the writer I think I am? What if this concept that I have, what if I can't put it into words? What if it's too big? What if I'm not intelligent enough? What if? So I am going to announce it here. I have a title. I came up with a title a couple of days ago in a coaching session, accidentally. But again, it's
I mean, what is it? What is it?
well, that's what
Let
I'm
me
telling.
out of that.
Okay, so the title is Conversations Around the Dinner Table, and the reason for writing it is that I have been blessed to bring up or be involved, or be bringing up because they're still around, um, two boys and two girls in that order. We have some really cool conversations around our dinner table. Um, I'm now living with my partner, and he has two sons and a daughter. So we're a big household.
Brady Bunch.
Yeah, and my son's girlfriend lives with us as well. And, there's other various in and out. There's always someone here. Um, and we all have some amazing conversations around our dinner table. And our dinner table is big enough to fit 11, I think. It's a bit squishy, but we fit 11. And we have some texters that sit on our table, and anyone who comes into the house and sits at our table can draw, write their name, doodle, write a quote down, whatever it is they want to do on the table. So it is this mishmash of creativity. It's all over the top of our wooden table. And I love it. So, and obviously we have to wipe it down and bits get faded and then someone else will come and draw over the top. But any guest that comes into our home, like anything, it's just this, there's jokes on there, we've got teenage boys, someone wrote poo, someone's written bum.
Oh, is that all? Having teenage sons, it doesn't stop there, right?
Well, there's they're banned from swearing on it.
Yep. Oh,
Um,
okay. Good.
yeah.
Good.
Anyway, so yeah, so this is my inspiration because these conversations that I see happening with my kids, my stepkids, with their friends, all of this, I see as a microcosm of what happens in our society, in our community, in our greater world. And I'm currently doing a course called Cultural Wayfinding, and it's about exploring the systems that are in play: patriarchy, capitalism, separation, um, all of the things that are in play that affect how we move through the world that we live in, um, which I see happening in the microcosm that exists around our table. And even telling you, there's part of me going, who are you to talk about this? But
Who are you not to?
thank you.
Ah, if you don't, by the way, this is going public, Ruth. This
I
is,
know.
you can't get out of this now. And you know
I
what? This is needed. And you know what? You said before that you started Boogie because you knew it was going to help Tennille. You need to do this because there are so many people that this will help. And doing it through, like, even the fact that you have this dinner table conversation, you've got this crazy dinner table that everyone can draw and write on, like bringing it into how can you address some of these really big, patriarchy is a big
Mm,
concept, but how can you bring that into a book that makes it more accessible for everyone to understand? And, everyone can picture sitting around a dinner table, even if you don't do it, we can all picture it. And that makes it, like I said, more accessible to so many more people.
mm,
You have to do this, and you're all about helping everyone else, Ruth. This is about everyone else, but at the same time,
yeah,
you're a writer and an editor of other people's books, and this is really about taking some of your own medicine, isn't it? That
it is. It is. And
yeah,
this is how I learn. This is exactly doing Boogie was exactly that. Like, I needed to experience, but I also, in doing that experience, I wrote about it and I got to write creatively about something that was fun and engaging. And yes, it helped, maybe helped to Neil, but I've now got, like, I still, even when I changed my website, I transposed all of those Boogie things over to my new website because I still loved that story. I read them all when I did it, and I was laughing and giggling and looking at the photos, and it was such a good time. And the same with writing Betrayed. I have to experience things to learn. It's kind of how I'm wired. It's taken me a long time to realize that, but the learning is worth it, and the experiences, whether they are good or bad. And I don't even like that good or bad because there's always good and bad in everything. But it's not duality like that. But even when an experience is uncomfortable or challenging or has some negativity to it, is probably a better way of wording it, there's still room for growth and learning. And that is the conversations I'm having with my children. Um, it is the conversations that we've had around making jokes about rape, because sometimes teenagers do make inappropriate jokes, and they didn't know what happened to me. They didn't know that hurt me, so we had to have conversations that were age appropriate around. I'd really appreciate it if you don't use that at the table, because you don't know, if you're talking jokingly at school with your friends, you don't know who's experienced this. Oh, yeah, okay, I see that. And there's conversation around that and exploration around that. Now, when I talk to my boys about what happened to me at that party, now they go, oh, okay, that's why you banned us from using that word. I'm like, yeah, because it actually was stabbing me through the heart. It's not your fault you didn't know. But it's that awareness, and that awareness needs to come out into our world. But I haven't felt qualified, being honest, to write about it without understanding the systems that are in play. And that was when I found, I follow a podcast called Business as Activism, and Elijah, who runs that podcast, interviewed a lady called Laura Hartley, and this is her course. And this is helping me structure the bigger things around the microcosm that I see happening in our home, I guess.
oh, Ruth,
Mm.
absolutely golden. I literally could just sit here and talk to you about this all day. Wow, I certainly didn't expect us to be going down this path. Yeah, you have to get that book out. Another girl, Vanessa Stoikov, who I had on the
Yep.
podcast earlier, who does a lot of work in the finance space. She wrote a book, and it was 5 conversations about money that would change your life. And again,
Mm.
it was to bring some of these conversations that are taboo, these conversations that need to be had. Having conversations about estate planning when your parents are getting older. Comfortable? Absolutely
Mm.
not. But if they're not had, the drama and the heartache that it can cause later on it's not worth it. So same thing, big systems, how can you bring that into the real world? that it is a conversation you can have around the dinner table, age appropriate, but even the
Yeah.
conversations it sounds like you're having with your children and the role model that you, I mean, I've always loved you anyway, but Ruth, you've taken that to a whole new level of wow, you've been going through this and now you're brave enough to get it out. And the amount of people you've just amplified the impact that you can have in so many people's worlds by doing it. But you had to reach inside to your own heart
Yeah.
in order to find that strength and that courage to be able to do this. Ruth, I'll get you to, in the show notes, we'll put any links to 5 books, Fruit, 5 books. And I'll look forward to updating everyone with conversations around the dinner table, authored and edited, I'm assuming, by Ruth Fae. Ruth, from the bottom of my heart for sharing what's inside your heart. Thank you. You will change many lives through being so visible and sharing a journey that I can only imagine has been nothing short of courageous. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kim.